Good evening, viewers. Industrial automation in India started around the late 60s and early 70s. There were a couple of individuals and professionals who were responsible at that time to bring industrial automation to India and pave path for its growth. Uh, I intend to bring some of them in this forum and actually ask about their experiences of how they went about and how industrial automation grew in India and what their roles were. The first of the series, I have with me Mr. Ashwin D. Panimangalore, who was with Larsen and Toubro. And I will now actually connect with him, and I think I will ask him to say what he has to say. I would like to invite you to this forum,
Okay.
and I would like you to say the few words about your childhood, where you grew, and up to your first job. In a brief way.
Okay. Well, nothing extraordinary. I was born and brought up in Bombay and went to school there. And uh, I think toward the later part of my school, my father was a central government officer. So he was transferred to many places around India every 3 years. So he got transferred to Pune, and I shifted to Pune and switched my school from Bombay to Pune, and then continued my education here in Pune, where I'm living right now, and joined the College of Engineering in Pune, and that's where I graduated from. Uh, I selected and got electrical engineering. Lucky to have it because most people were going for mechanical in those days. So I got electrical, and when I graduated, which is way back in 1964, uh, electronics was mercury arc rectifiers and rotary converters and vacuum tubes. Okay, that's what we studied, apart from motors, transformers, etc. So that's the educational background people like me have come from. So therefore, as you can say, it's been a long, long way from a time like that to a time like today, you know, where you're talking about IIoT and so on. So it's been a big journey, very exciting journey, and education just taught us the basics. Finally, education is about what you're learning along the way. It's a continuous process. We are still learning. We have learned. There are many things we have unlearned, and then we have learned a lot of new things. So the more you learn and the more you involve yourself, I think it can be a very exciting life. So that's what it's been for me. I derive great satisfaction from that,
And how?
and still
What's your
trying to
first
learn a lot.
job? Where did you? I mean, were you in Larsen Super right from the beginning, or you had some other stints before
Oh
you?
no, my first job being an electrical engineer with a power background, I joined a company called, I was very fortunate, I think. I joined a company called Tata Murla Jera. Do you remember that company?
Yes, yes, high
Uh,
voltage switchgear.
yeah, so Merlin Gerin was later bought up by Schneider, if you know. Uh, but when they set up this company, I would say it was a very futuristic objective of Mr. Cherian of Voltas. It was Volta's initiative. Voltas were partners of Brown Boveri, and Brown Boveri was big in those days until it was bought over by Asia and became ABB. And Brown Boveri, BBC they used to call it, was keen to start in India. I'm talking about back in 1960s, start manufacturing, starting a regular operation. And Voltas, being traders, they were only into selling Amul and pharmaceuticals and so on. So setting up manufacturing was and air conditioning, there was not in their mindset. So BBC ditched them and set up on their own. And then Voltas was left hanging, and Mr. Cherian there said, this is wrong, or they have to think twice before we say no to manufacturing. And he partnered with Merlin, which was not as big as BBC, but very important. And so they set up this company, beautiful factory in Thane, and that's where I joined as a graduate trainee. And we made extra high voltage switchgear for railways and electrical power. So that was my start. That was my first job.
And when did you join L&T? Because I know you from the L&T days.
Exactly. So I think about 4 or 5 years later, I found that TMG, the products were great. Merlin Jara was a great company, was not going anywhere. Various reasons for that. So people were leaving, and I also decided to leave because I found L&T to be a pretty dynamic company and making forays into the market. So I decided to switch to L&T and join them. And I think it turned out to be a very good decision from my point of view, because L&T was a very, dynamic company, even from those days, alive to what's happening, keen on development, keen on quality, very, very solid on processes. I think it had everything which an engineering company, I would say, of that time, any company of that time. And so I was happy I joined there. And it was switchgear, of course. It was a fledgling in switchgear. And in 1970, I joined in 70. And few months later, a gentleman called V.N. Dravid, who was with GEC of UK, joined us. And he was brought in
Ashwin,
by
a
Mr.
little louder, Ashwin, because your voice is falling.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, he gentleman called. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Dravid joined us, and he came from GEC, and Mr. UV Rao brought him, and Mr. UV Rao introduced him to us, and he said, he comes from a background of drives. We didn't know what are drives, honestly. Variable speed drives, what is that? We only know AC motors are constant speed and DC motors were hardly there. And he said he is going to help us get into drives business. So you need all your support. He needs all your support. And it will be part of switchgear. And once the business grows, we can think of making it independent. So the first thing he had to do was to educate us, get us familiar with what this DC drive is. And that's where it all started, because it was not only educating people in the company, we also had to go and tell people outside about it. So I would say he was a pioneer as far as L&T was concerned in the market. And perhaps also in the market, he was one of the pioneers, along with companies like yours, DBK, which came in at that time. And Dravid built an excellent team around him. He brought in people from IIT who were power electronics specialists in into key positions in R&D, engineering, and support, and built an excellent team of people around it. So that's how it started.
Yes, I know Mr. Dravid because I was working in GEC, but of course in the radio division, when he was in the contracts division in GEC in Calcutta.
Oh, yes, he was doing crane drives, I think, at that time.
And of course, he left while I was in GEC, and subsequently I joined the DBK at that time. So I know, and I always consider Mr. Dravid to be the pioneer, and I think he's the father of industrial automation in India. I mean, I always feel that way, because he's the man who really
he was the first. He was the first.
to the great level that it's in today.
And then, of
Well,
course, your Khaitan was the gentleman who started from your side,
yes.
right? Dhruv
Uh,
Khaitan.
in those early days, I mean, the early 70s when you joined, when actually the product was not known in the market, you were trying to
Hmm.
develop, the industries were all just coming up at that time. I mean, the industrial
Hmm.
growth was there. How did you see the market? I mean, where did you go and how did you do your first sales? How did you do your first product?
Well, he was the man who decided which industry segment would best be suited for drives. And the paper industry seemed to be a ready an application where one could use variable speed drives. And I think the first major job, major, in those days, any small order was a major order. So was Balarpur. Balarpur were setting up a coating plant in Yamunanagar, and Punjab and Haryana and that territory was being looked after by a very dynamic gentleman in L&T called R.K. Gogia. And he had very good, Gogia. So he had very good relations with all the customers around. And Balarpur was one of his good customers. And he found that they're setting up this coating plant. And Robert said, yes, here's an opportunity for us. So that was the first order, major order, which was booked by Mr. Dravid, and that was a challenging application. You understand, from a DC drives perspective, with binders and calendars and the whole sectional system, which we booked in 1971 or 72, I think. And we didn't realize the challenge until we started executing the order, and it was a learning process along the way. But I would say we did a good job of it. All of it was well done. We had large panels of discrete analog electronic cards doing all the functions in racks, 19-inch racks, and the thyristor bridges with the control electronics for each motor, and there was double-ended regenerative drives which we built. So I would say that was a great start for us. And thereafter, the cement industry became a ready recipient of DC drives. And the first application in the cement, as you know, was a kiln drive. And our first, the customers were kind in those days, some of them. Many were circumspect about applying it. But among cement, I would say Madras Cement, who were headed by the Rajas, the Ramasubramaniam Raja, they were very, very both accommodative, and they were keen to use, they trusted us. And I would say we did all that we could to make sure that whatever was opportunity was given. So the first kiln drive we did was at Madras Cement, and the kiln takes a huge amount of current to at start, and to avoid tripping, we devised an improvised circuit which would bypass or delay the trip until the kiln started rotating. and, and that's how we managed. Once it started rotating, of course, controlling it was easier. So that's how we started in the cement industry with a few applications, kiln, coolers, maybe a couple of fans. And
I remember a few terminologies, soft start, regenerative braking, all
yeah,
those things,
regenerative braking.
it is to be part of the
Yeah.
cement kiln.
Yeah, kiln had dynamic braking. We
Yes,
had a
dynamic
resistance
braking.
bank where all the energy was fed and it came to a halt. yeah, so we had regenerative, we had dynamic braking. Uh,
And we
so,
had those consultants named Holtec, I think, basically in those
oh
days,
yeah,
who would involve the cement plants.
Holtec was the main consultant for cement. And from Madras Cement, it went to ACC. ACC was, they had all these wet process plants, if you
Hmm.
remember. And when they wanted to modernize, they had to come into dry process. And dry process meant a change. And that's where the drives came in. So quite a few ACC plants came up as an opportunity for applying DC drives. So we did 7 or 8 ACC plants, later on, and that helped us to get a foothold into the industry. So looking back, I think it was paper, from Ballarpur. We did 2 or 3 jobs in Ballarpur, then we did a project in West Coast Paper Mills at Dandeli, here near Hubli, and many more. So that was a start.
I know Andhra Pradesh paper mill also, I think L&T.
APPM, yeah, right.
I remember that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And then I think
There was an ex.
when the rolling mills and steel started taking,
Yeah, then steel, metal became the biggest consumer of drive systems. Not only drives, automation, and the work, everything. I think there was a point in that period, 70s, 80s, when metal was, I remember, taking was 40% of the business. Am I right?
yes,
50%?
yeah.
Because metal was a market for us, right from raw material handling plant, where the coal comes in and the iron ore comes in, and then from that point up to the blast furnace, when it is fed into the blast furnace, then it comes out into the billet slabs, slab mills, the billet mills, hot rolling strip mills, and then you have the cold rolling, and then you have the process lines, the cold roll strips, and then you split them, and then you process them, and you galvanizing, and so on, cutting. The metal was big, huge, whether it was a Bhilai steel plant or whether it was a downstream processing unit. Metal was the market for us, for all of us, everybody.
Yes, yes, for all of us.
Everybody got his share, I
And I
would say.
think the tire also started coming at that time.
Tire, yes, yeah, very, very true. Tire,
But
and
what was a very, I would say, surprising, and at that time, I think it was revolutionary in the automation market. L&T for the first time came with a modular drive. They came with a module. I can't remember the name of that module, and we were all actually making, each drive was a project by itself, a product by itself.
oh,
But L&T came with a module, and
came with a
that was
product,
actually
yeah,
that changed the way people were looking at drives.
yeah, yeah. Y- uh,
And how are you
I
involved? I mean, I would like to know the little process of how, I mean, from a normal drive which was making discrete components, when you went
see
into the modular for the first time.
the objective was always to make a product of the DC drive, and then apply it for an application whereby you built around it. The product was inside what we put in a panel, and that panel had the rest of the electronics which was used, configured to the application, whether it's a kin drive or a cooler or a drive for a paper machine or a rolling mill. So essentially, the DC product, which comprised the bridge, the power electronic thyristor brick, and its firing circuit, its protection circuit, okay, was a module, and there was the control electronics on it, which was added onto it, thereby making it a DC drive product. So that concept in L&T started. We called it I think it was the 2P. We had a P generation. I don't know how the P came. Uh, there was a 2P product, which is a genuine product. followed by an enhancement. It was a 3P, and then was a 4P, which was truly a box, a DC drive box, the 4P. And I would say the 4P was very successful. We had quite a few hundreds. I think finally uh, we used to keep tab on every reference list. We had an exhaustive reference list which we built with the customer name, the application, the rating, the numbers, and where it's located with industry wise. And I think we reached about 7 or 8,000.
That was a very great.
In those days, it was pretty good, I would say.
Yeah, pretty good because
and largely, yeah.
Because I think L&T was the first to come with that.
Yeah.
In those days, I mean, who should you consider as as your main competitor? I mean, where you would say, oh, the guy is there. I mean,
See, before I go to main competitor, I want to say here, I think we must give tribute to the fact that those who try to develop it on their own, DBK, L&T, Nelco, let's not forget Nelco.
Yeah.
They came in on their own with their own R&D, just like we did, just like DBK did. And there was Jyoti. I think we've forgotten that Jyoti also was there. And Jyoti, I don't know where that company is now, maybe closed. They came in with UPS too at that time, Power Electronics was not the dry, it was UPS. So there were these 4 companies over there. And as time progressed, DBK became Allen Bradley. Siemens was there. Okay. Jyoti fell out of the race. Cutler Hammer came in, if you remember, with the Katuria.
Yes.
Sadly, they also fell out of the race. Sadly, I'm saying because they were the early entrants, And there was ABB who came in little after Siemens. So it became a competition between ABB, Siemens, Allen Bradley, which is Rockwell then, and L&T. And out of these 4, I'm happy to say that L&T was the only true
Indian company,
indigenously developed product. You remember?
Very right.
We had the DC drive of our own, whereas DBK, which was, if I'm not wrong, purchased by Rockwell, right?
That's right. We had a joint venture with them, and then it was acquired by them. Joint venture took place because of the next set of products that came, PLC. We tied up with them for PLC, and that's how it all started with them.
So we had
which brings me to the next point of how did you see the growth of industrial automation? It started with drives, mainly changing Maud Leonard into drives, going to DC drives, and then as you said, all these applications in various industries. And then suddenly, when Siemens plant started operating, PLCs started coming. I mean, because till then, I mean, static logic and relay logic were being used. And how did you see that market actually, developing into a PLC market?
Even before PLCs came in, we in L&T had developed that hardwired static logic system, which was, all these and/or cards, which were all stacked together to make a logic process, all hardwired. We called it, in fact, hardwired static logic. And that was used for boiler control, sequential interlocking, and protection, and so on. And while we were doing this, we came to know about PLCs. So we started developing our own PLC. In fact, we brought out one in the market. We called it Memolog. A small one, with I think 64 or 128 input output, just for sequencing interlocking with a timer card there. Now, while we were doing that, we found that Rourkela steel plant had imported PLCs, and they were looking for replacement. And that lot of PLCs was from this company Modicon. Okay, so Modicon, the RSP needed replacements. They had a PLC of Modicon called 184, first generation 84, which at that time you had Rockwell had PLC 3, right? Before
PLC 2.
PLC 3, PLC 2, yes. So 184 was 1, not even 2,
Yeah,
1.
it's one. Correct.
So, uh, and we came to know about Modicon, and we thought it's Modicon and Allen Bradley were top two companies in PLCs, emerging uh, contenders in the automation market. So we we booked this Rourkela order, and we got in touch with Modicon. We executed it very well. Our people got trained there. It is of course imported by RSP. Their guys were trained. Our people were trained, and that was our first exposure to a PLC. And once we were trained, it looked pretty exciting. And we thought we should tie up with Modicon to start making in India. There's no question of import those days. You had to manufacture. And Modicon came across and said, hey, Indian market's too small. We'd love to tie up. It's too small. We can't give our time for this. So we said, what do we do? They said, we got a Japanese partner, and we've given our license to them, the Japanese. And why don't you guys tie up with the Japanese? So he told us the name of the Japanese company. What's the name of the company? Yaskawa. We said, okay. So Yaskawa, got in touch with Yaskawa. And Yaskawa was making flame-proof switchgear. Yaskawa is an exciting story, I must tell you. A company which was in flame-proof switchgear and switches and so on is today a robotics champion, right? It's a robotics champion. So their journey is something super, worth studying for any entrepreneur in this industry. So Yaskawa got in touch, and they were keen. They were very keen. Although the Japanese of that time were not keen, I must tell you. India was a strange country for them because thanks to our license control policy, rightly so. Yaskawa was willing. They were a small company at that time, and that's how we started with Yaskawa. And the interesting thing I'll tell you here, which is very important, we wanted to make the Modicon, by the time the dialogue went on, it was the 80s, 82, 83, 81. Modicon had brought in the 584 PLC, which was equal to Rockwell's PLC 3, right? Yeah. So the 584 was a big box like that, a trunk with a lot of electronics, and you couldn't even lift it, it is so heavy. So Yaskawa told us that we said we want 584. So they said, we have made small improvement in 584. We said, okay. Is it as good? Yes, it is good. Please try it. Japanese humility. So when we saw it, they said we call it U84. And the U84 was 30% smaller in size, maybe 60% lesser in weight. Okay. 35% lesser in cost. And functionality, some more functions which the 584 didn't have. And the IO modules were about 50% of that size. So one of our guys had put a specification sheet of what we didn't know what is the U84, of what we should get from U84. He put it all down. I still remember this. His wish list. Huh? He wrote it all down. And then we got the U84 spec. And I can tell you that every bit of what this guy had put down as his wish was there. It was there. And I tell you that product served us, it was our lifeline. I don't know what we would have done without Yaskawa. Not only the 584, but the 384 of Modicon, which they modified once again, what they call small improvement, but it was a huge, huge improvement. They called it the R84H. So we started manufacturing that and we went on till the 90s, 10, 12 years, we extended its life. We started making our own IOs. Then it was a long story. So that's how it began. And Yaskawa, I would say, was responsible, or peg on which we stood and grew.
I think beyond PLCs, I think then it moved to AC drive. The next product that came in and hit the market was AC
Beyond
drive.
PLCs, once it became PLCs, it was first machine control, where we used to apply that R84H, which had a 256 IO. We didn't have a smaller PLC than that. Yaskawa didn't have it. So Siemens had those PLCs and ABB had. So those were out of our market. But when it came to a larger PLC, it meant that you had to use it for plant control, not for machine, like the U84, with the 3,000-4,000 IOs. And that's when we went into, we realized the U84 is for metal industry and for the cement industry. Perfect for the cement industry and the metal industry, which was anyway, those days, 70% of the market, 70, 80%.
Correct.
But then came the need for an HMI, I don't know if you know this, but when we were doing the cement plant, we did our first cement plant at Gujarat Ambuja back in 83, 84. And we built our own HMIs, customized HMIs, using monitors where we built the software, we integrated them, networked all of it, and we designed and supplied, commissioned a plant control system back in 83, 84, which was perhaps the first in India. And the Ambuja guys were thrilled about it. But the problem which arose there was, which we never foresaw, where with so many IOs and a network which was very, this network speeds and throughput was so low that the update time was as high as 50 seconds, which is unacceptable for any control system. So while everything else was fine, this was not. So the challenge to up the network update time from 50 to 5 or 6 or 7 seconds was another technical challenge, which I would say the L&T team, I reckon to be the best in the country at that time. Thanks to the L&T culture of getting the best engineer, training them and giving them an opportunity to work. We built data concentrators at each subsection of the plant, which would crunch the data and feed it into the HMI. And we succeeded in bringing up the update time to a reasonable level of 5 or 6 seconds, which was all right, So, because cement plant process is not that fast.
I remember, I mean, L&T was one of the first to bring an integrated automation for a plant.
Yeah,
Before
that
that,
was
it was
the
all
first.
discrete here, there,
Yeah, yeah.
So I
I
think it was
rem-
great work getting all the automation together, integrating
yeah,
them and giving the data, giving HMIs, it was something fabulous in those days.
yeah, yeah. It was fabulous. It was really
And then
fabulous.
came the AC drive,
Yeah.
the
So
industry
before I
started
come
with
to
the
AC
AC
drives,
drive,
I
and
want to
then the
tell you.
digital drive, digital DC drive.
Yes, correct. I want to tell you, but before the AC drive,
Huh.
while the PLCs were flowing into the market, and as I said, we were Indian. All you guys were American, Swedish, or Siemens, German. Okay, and all of you had your HMIs. We didn't have one. What did we do? We got hold of a British company, hmm, which was making cards for putting into the slot of an IBM PC. And that card was, that card made the PC into an HMI, and the card was enriched with so much firmware that you could build, configure screens and control, monitoring control and visualization, all three from that card. So all you needed was an IBM PC uh, with its monitor and the operating system. On top of that, you had this card which contributed to monitoring, visualization, and control with uh, configurability. So our boys were able to build screens and hook onto IOs of the PLC and make a monitoring and control system using those HMIs, which we used to a large extent in all these plants, including cement plants, which work very beautifully. There's no problem with them at all. That company was a fledgling in the UK called AFE, which later got bought over by GE. GE bought over that company, and I think they disappeared after that. Once PCs became much faster, you didn't need the card anymore. The PC became more powerful. And then PC became the hardware platform for all HMIs in future. So coming to your question now about DC drives, uh, once again, I must tell you that we all know AC drives as today as digital drives, compact, configurable, just mount it, connect it, configure it, and it's up and running in half an hour, right? Most people don't know what's inside the box today. They just say 5 kilowatt drive for this, here it is, and you put it up and it's up and running in half an hour. But we started design and manufacture of AC drives analog once again in 1982-83. And the first AC drives were voltage fed inverters. And, a 5 HP drive was a panel, 2000 high panel, single panel. And we made, for larger ratings, I would say about 75 kilowatt and above, we made current fed inverters. Now, this before the AC drives, as you know it, the PWM inverter, which is today a standard with IGBT in the power circuit. Before that, the current fed inverters were thyristors, and 150 kilowatt drive was like 4 panels. So they work very well. We supplied them to a lot of applications across the country in different industries, mining, material handling, and so on, until the time came when the inverters got smaller. Uh, Power electronic devices were IGBTs, and the electronics was analog. The control was pulse width modulation, which would allow sine wave output into the motor. You know, the inverters which we were designing used to give square wave output. So you had to derate the motor by 10%. The PWM inverters are giving sine wave outputs and neatly packaged, easier to handle, lower in cost, became popular. And once it became, we were making PWM inverters with in collaboration with a French company. It was short-lived called Joma Schneider, which later I think they broke up and they, bought by different parties. For a short while, we were making those until uh, we found that Yaskawa, Yaskawa had a transformation. When they were going good in the PLC market, now this is business focus, this is some learning. They're doing very well in PLCs. Automation in Japan was on the rise, and Yaskawa dropped out of the PLC market. Dropped out. We were shocked. How can you drop out of a growing market with so much knowledge and experience which you have gained? To which they said, we will use our resources on AC drives, our factories on AC drives, no longer on PLCs, AC drives, and we shall become number one in the AC drive market in the world within the next 5 years. Okay? And believe you me, Yaskawa became number one in the world. They beat everybody, all the Americans, all the Europeans. They were a fledgling company. People used to confuse when we used to say Yaskawa, who's that? Oh, Yoshikawa, the camera makers. So we said, no, Yaskawa. Who's Yaskawa? That was the perception of customers. And from there to become number one in the AC drive market in the world, where every American company is buying Yaskawa products. They set up a factory in America so that Americans would be more comfortable with, and that's how we latched on to Yaskawa, L&T, our automation division. And it was a beautiful relationship. They were very, very supportive. And yet, at that time, in the 90s, after the opening up of the Indian market, customs duties dropping, and our numbers had not yet grown to the level they are, they came to in 2000, 10 years later. They didn't see justification in manufacturing AC drives in India, given the quantities. And they said that, the shop floor which you have, okay, where you're making 300 drives a month or 200 drives a month, we make 5,000 drives. So we need that kind of volume in order to make it competitive. And unless the material cost is not less than 70% of the price of the product, that means the value add or the incremental costs on manufacturing has to be minimal for you to be competitive. So we had to start importing those drives. But nevertheless, I would say the product was first class, extremely reliable. We had hardly any failures. If there were failures, it was for other reasons. And I would say for that reason, the AC drive market, customer confidence is built. The product is easy to use. It never fails. I remember a cement plant, Satna Cement, I had gone to because they were our customers and customers for DC drives. And I saw that Yaskawa logo, on a panel somewhere in the cement mill. I said, "Oh, this is Yaskawa AC drive. I didn't know you have got Yaskawa drive. It came with a cement mill which was imported from Japan." So I said, can I see it? It was not a, it was a current fed inverter. He said, okay, no problem, you can see it. So he asked the that electrician to go find the key to open the panel. The electrician could not find the key. It took half an hour for him to find the key. I said, क्या आपने ये कभी खोला नहीं इसको? नहीं साहब, कभी नहीं खोला. जब से हमने चालू किया ना, वो वैसा ही बंद रहा है. कभी कभी वो डाउन नहीं हुआ. हमने कुछ उसके अंदर कुछ नहीं किया है, तो थोड़ा मुश्किल है वो चाबी निकालने का. I said, इतना पुराना है ये? कुछ 9-10 साल पुराना है. तो मैंने कहा 9-10 साल से आपने खोला नहीं है ड्राइव को? नहीं साहब, नहीं खोला है.
Yes,
So
that's how.
that I learned is quality. You know, if a product has worked without attention in a cement mill for 10 years, hats off. I'm talking about products of that generation.
I think L&T then moved into more solutions, larger solutions, larger, I mean, control
Yes,
automation things,
Yeah,
rather
true.
than concentrating only on industry. And, I think that was the time when you were actually really concentrating on that area.
You know, we realized that we have to transform. We had to get volumes in a company like L&T. Unless you were making sizable volume business, you couldn't be there. You know, our other divisions were doing 800 crore, 1,000 crores. We were nowhere near that, and that was one issue we had. The second issue was that you we were designing and making products or manufacturing products under license, and then finding a solution, and then building the solution, and then commissioning it for the volumes we were in. No, that kind of thing is done by a ABB or a Siemens or a Rockwell, who are doing billions of dollars business. So they cover the whole gamut from product design to big solutions. ABB typically, you know. For L&T automation to do that, unless we had that kind of resource, was very difficult, impossible. That to given our Indian volumes. So time had come to become a solution provider, a system integrator, a large system integrator, and use products which we could buy out, not necessarily make ourselves. And so we got into that kind of business where maybe only 30% was made by us, and the rest was bought out and made projects. So that's how we transformed from a product developer, product manufacturer, license manufacturer, systems engineering, solution to projects. That was how.
Now coming a little out of L&T,
Yeah.
you were also I think the chairman of the IEEMA.
Yes, yeah.
In those days it was a powerful body because all the automation guys were there, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
used to have a lot of common problems about foreign exchange fluctuations,
Yes.
sometimes
Of course.
switchgear not being available. So many
Yes.
problems we faced. How
Yes.
did you find your tenure in IEEMA?
I think that was exciting. I'll tell you, we had a number of issues. Okay, one was the anomalies in where classification, the classification of customs duties. Some people were importing under something, some people were importing under something else. UPS was the biggest, what shall I say, problem. So the first thing I did, I said we have to approach the government, and the government in those days won't listen to individuals; they only listen to a body. So I went to EMA with this problem, and I met the joint secretary, a very good person, a South Indian gentleman. I forget his name. I went with the problem, and I gave him examples. Now I can't recall because this was very long ago exactly the classification, but I knew there were anomalies which were being misinterpreted. either by the customs official or by the manufacturer. Either way, it was causing a unequal application of duties in the market. So he understood the problem, and within a week, a notification came which removed the anomaly and made it level for all. So I think that was one which we did, which I'm happy we did that. The second thing was, we used to have a lot of World Bank projects in those days. Uh, and all of us were bidding, Rockwell and ABB and Siemens and a couple of others, Nelco. And I found that the World Bank conditions were fairly complicated. The duty drawbacks and so on and so forth. How you price it, how you claim your benefits was not easy to understand, especially when the fact that you have to bid absolutely correctly. You are not allowed to manipulate the bid later on. What you bid was the end, which is a norm today, but in those days, World Bank was the first to introduce such a condition. But even execution of that job, you have to follow very, very minutely everything from packing, not only manufacture, packing to dispatch to receipt to collecting your money. And I found that many of us and our competitors were not doing it right. So I think at EMA, what I did was I got, because L&T being a large resource outside, automation, nothing in L&T. The rest of L&T is the big dada. So I got some experts to call all your guys, commercial guys came, and I said, now we give them a lecture on how to bid for World Bank and how to execute the job. And I think he did a very good job, brought in a lot of clarification. Some of your people were making a few mistakes, not only in bidding, but even later. And I think we were able to communicate the best way to execute a World Bank job. So we didn't come out with any bruised knees, at the end of the day. So that was one. The third was pricing. Now, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about it. Okay. So we found that there were some guys pricing crazy, giving terrible conditions, terms and conditions, which was putting others at great, what shall I say, under great pressure. So I think we all got together and said, now let's, we all have to make money, we have to make profit, compete all right, but don't sink everybody. So I think we got into a position where we were able to compete fairly.
Very right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, actually, the other thing was, somewhere in the, I would say, late 90s and early 2000s, IT started actually playing a role. And
Sorry?
then in the last decade, IT has played a major role in manufacturing. And then, we have IT penetrating into manufacturing. How has that changed the industrial automation scenario?
I didn't. Your voice is going smaller.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, better. Yeah. Okay.
In the last couple of years, decades, IT has also come into the picture, and IT has started penetrating into manufacturing.
Yes.
And how do you think IT has changed the way manufacturing is being operated?
Well, that was in the, I know which year. That was because I took active part in that. I knew that was coming. I also realized that cement and steel had reached a point of where the big players had a better foothold, ABB, Siemens, and so on, and L&T was only going down to process lines and stuff like that. So DCS was coming into the picture and trying to get into cement plant control. So we shifted industry focus into oil and gas and other, non-metal, non-cement. And that is when IT started coming in. So the first L&T started implementing an ERP system. And then I found that ISA had brought in an ISA 95 bus, which was a connector from automation to ERP. There were other products coming out, especially for the automobile industry, which were configurator tools which enabled manufacturing to become flexible. So we had flexible manufacturing systems in factory automation systems, which were linked to ERP. So that was the first initial, I would say, the areas where there were opportunities to work in ERP integration with automation. That was one. The second was there was a product called the Historian. You know, where all plant data. Today you talk of IoT, right? And you're looking at data from little devices. But at that time, there was data available in a plant. You were using it for DCS control, PLC control, monitoring. But we were not using that data for plant optimization, plant maintenance, and so on and so forth. Asset management, as we used to call it later. So I found a company in California called PI. They were making what is called a plant historian, which used the existing systems. What they did was they collected all that data into the historian and presented it in a way for you to use it for plant maintenance and plant optimization. So we tied up with that company, and by that time I was, I retired in 2002, and I tied up with this company in 2001. And thereafter, from what I was told, L&T did a pretty good job of using this historian for plant information and plant maintenance and optimization. So that was one area where technology, IT, and automation came together. The second I found was manufacturing execution systems, MES. Now today, MES is proliferating. You have inventory management systems, you have procurement management systems, you have the works, all across the plant. You have all these beautiful software products, right up to CRM, right? So manufacturing execution systems was below the ERP and above the plant control, above PLCs and DCS. It was a layer which came in, and I found another company called Camstar in the US, which we met, and we found that a good company to tie up with to do. As I said, we had become solution providers, project executors. We were not only merely making PLCs and drives. We had gone away from there.
And how has internet affected the manufacturing?
I'm sorry, can you speak louder?
Now, how did internet, now we call the industry?
Yeah, so I'll come to that. And this was, now Camstar was interested, but they said, hey, look, the Indian, just like Modicon had told us, we find the Indian manufacturing industry is still small. And a product like this, we think it's a little too early for you. So we don't, once we tie up with you, we have to apply resources, we have to meet you, train you, support you, and so on and so forth. So until the numbers are there, that doesn't seem worthwhile. So we said, okay, we'll have to wait, try and do something else. But later I heard that Camstar did tie up with L&T, and started doing a lot of jobs. And then I found that they were acquired by Siemens. So, so, so that's how, you know, the IT early inroads of information technology into automation began, and today it's widely prevalent across the globe. You have system integrators for plant control. You have system integrators for specific plant optimization at a higher level. You have system integrators for manufacturing execution. Okay. You have all kinds of people doing various things.
You know.
You have guys doing robotics, and they excel in different sections of the plant. You know, there are system integrators for specific applications who have expertise there. So it's come a long way, you know.
Correct. See,
Uh,
you have been in industry for about 45, 50 years nearly. How do you see
I,
the attitude of engineers in those days, let's say 70s, 80s, versus the engineers now? I mean, you know, do you see a see change in the way they operate, the way they think, the way they behave?
it's a vast difference. You know. It's an amazingly vast difference. I can't tell you how it's now. When I see a guy looking at an AC drive, all he sees is kilowatt and price. When people who work for us, they looked, the kilowatt was the starting point.
Yes.
It was the application, you know, demands of the application. It was how you would match the drive for the application, how you would configure it, and how you would make sure that the drive performed exactly to the requirements of the application.
Yes, I remember so much discussion taking place on the PIV of the thyristor. What do you think, in your opinion, I mean, the way the automation industry is moving, where do you think it move in the next 5 to 10 years?
Uh, Very difficult to hazard a guess, honestly. Very difficult. But one thing is sure, it'll grow. It has to grow. Applications will increase. I think what will come in, I can broadly say, is more and more intelligence. It's already happening. You have devices at the lowest level with smart technologies. You know, you have with the IIoT coming in for industries. I'm not even referring to IoT for domestic or commercial applications. With the industry coming in, there are enormous number of possibilities which can be tapped, and I think it'll, in the immediate future, what I see is the IoT which has come in into the industry will greatly help in asset management. When I say asset management, I mean asset maintenance. Finally, what are we looking at? In great competition, you're looking at return on assets, right? You're looking at how productively your asset is performing. So IIoT is going to help in a considerable way to improve your return on assets with better asset maintenance, with better asset productivity. That's where it's going to help. And I'm sure there'll be enough number of engineers who will be able to apply this to make it happen.
Very
So I
nice.
see this coming in, and I see system integration increasingly being plug and play. You know, earlier we had products which were customized, then products become plug and play. Now products are being integrated across networks. It's reasonably easy to integrate them. The stage will come when it's all plug and play. And the real intelligence will be in optimization and asset management.
I think before we close, one final call on how has COVID affected the automation industry? I mean, in terms of application of automation in
I
industry.
frankly don't know, honestly, I don't know. I mean, imagine this work from home and all that is all very valid for, guys who do coding and stuff like that. But automation is about plants. It's about manufacturing. It's about refineries working and cement plants working and uh, steel plants working right down to the process line. So this work from home doesn't apply to those people, right? Doesn't apply. So uh, how they have been impacted, I wish somebody starts a interview review process with all the plants and ask all those engineers at sites and ask all the system integrators, how have you managed this? How have you managed? I'd like to get an answer to that question. I don't know the answer, frankly.
Anyway, I think
Maybe you
Ashwin,
should.
it's been a fabulous talk with you. I mean,
Oh, thank
we
you.
thought maybe 40 minutes, 30 minutes, so it's over an hour, and
Oh, is it? Yeah, it's over an hour. I'm sorry.
and it's interesting, and it could go on for a few more hours. I know,
Oh,
but it's been excellent talking to you,
thank you.
and
Thank you.
we'll be in touch, and we need your support in the automation industry as we go down the line.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ramnath. Thank you for giving me the chance to tell you a little bit.
Nay, 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 what is this? You are going to benefit the industry. I mean, a lot of young
I hope
people who
so.
have never been connected with the industry the way they have been in the last 40, 50 years, they will come to know about it.
I hope so. I hope it's of interest.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.